Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 279, Mena Val. Warning, this episode does cover references to domestic violence and suicide. Mena Val was a notable Australian circus performer in the early 1900s. She was recognised for her skills in slack wire walking, trick cycling and whip cracking. Mena Val was a stage name for Wilhelmina Sophia Kelson, who was born in 1889 in Collingwood, Victoria, to Hans Lorist Kelson, known as Louis, and Maria Fritz, known as Sophia, who were both born in Norway. They emigrated initially to New Zealand, where they had their first 3 children, and then moved to Australia. On the 8th of December 1886, in the New South Wales Police Gazette in Sydney, a warrant's been issued by the Warder Police Bench for the arrest of Lorist Kelson, charged with unlawfully deserting his wife Sophia, leaving her without means of support. He's 42, 5 foot 6 inches high, with a stout build, fair hair and complexion, light blue eyes, and a slight moustache only. Dressed in a black coat, grey trousers and a hard black hat, a native of Norway. The complainant, Sophia Kelson of Surrey Hills. By the time Wilhelmina was born in 1889, they'd moved to Victoria. On the 7th of June 1892, in the Melbourne Age, a mother and daughter yesterday attempted in a sensational manner to commit suicide. Laura Fritz, who recently arrived in this colony from Norway, is an old woman of 73 years of age, and her daughter, who emigrated in her company, Louisa Fritz, is aged 30. They appear to have taken up their residence with Mrs. Sophia Kelson in Collingwood and lived quietly, it was believed, until yesterday afternoon, when the mother had a dispute with another person who lives at Mrs. Kelson's house. A short time subsequently, in pursuance of a decision mutually arrived at, the mother and daughter each swallowed a large quantity of chlorodyne. Symptoms of poisoning becoming apparent to other inmates of the dwelling, they each admitted on being interrogated that they were tired of life and had determined to die together. A constable was accordingly called in at once, and the women, who were gradually lapsing into a condition of insensibility, were removed to the Melbourne Hospital. Here Dr. Bunteen saw them and treated them. They recovered considerably, but as their condition was judged to be serious, they were detained for future medical attention. And the Tarrangara Times and Malden Newstead, Barringup Lencory and Muckleford Advertiser on the 8th of June outlined the case in a little more detail. A case of attempted suicide presenting extraordinary features occurred in Collingwood on Monday. An old woman, Laura Fritz, and her daughter Louisa Fritz resided with Mrs. Sophia Kelson, a married daughter of Mrs. Fritz's. The family life appeared latterly to be an unhappy one, and as a result it is said that Mrs. Kelson refused to permit Mrs. and Miss Fritz to reside any longer in the house. This upset them so greatly that they determined to commit suicide, and to that end procured 2 bottles of chlorodyne, intending to take one each. On Monday, however, when they resolved to drink the poison, they altered their minds as to the quantity they would take, and only drank 1 bottle between them, the daughter following the lead of the mother. Under the care of Dr. Bunting, they are progressing favourably and may be considered past all danger. On the 11th of May 1896 in the Melbourne Age. At the Collingwood Court on Friday, Louis Kelson of Wellington Street was charged with assaulting his wife and his daughter. On the previous night, he hit Mrs. Kelson in the face and struck his daughter on the temple. They sent for the police, but on the arrival of the constables, the accused outwitted them for a time by climbing on the roof. Eventually the constables followed him, and an exciting game of hide-and-seek followed. The man was only caught and taken from his elevated position after much exertion and risk. The bench imposed 2 fines of £5 with the alternative of 1 month's imprisonment upon him. And another article in the Mercury and Weekly Courier of Victoria on the 14th of May 1896 says, a wife beater named Louis Kelson, a resident of Wellington Street, against whom there were 6 previous convictions, was charged at the Collingwood Court on Friday with assaulting his wife and daughter. The 2 appeared in evidence against him and satisfied the bench that they had been brutally ill-used. Sophia Kelson, Wilhelmina's mother, died when she was 13. On the 7th of March 1905 in the Melbourne Age, it had a memorial notice 3 years after her mother died. In loving memory of our darling mother, Maria Sophia Kelson, who died on the 7th of March 1902, inserted by her sorrowing daughters Julia and Mena. Louis Kelson had been admitted into the hospital for the insane at Kew on October the 23rd, 1907. He had senile dementia, and he was feeble and inclined to restlessness and wandering away. During his stay, he progressively became weaker, and on December the 10th, 1908, he was unable to get out of bed and remained in his bed until his death took place on the 14th of December, 1908. So on the 19th of December, 1908, in the Melbourne Age, his death was announced. Louis, the dearly beloved husband of the late Sophia Kelson and beloved father of Mrs. J. Martina, New South Wales, John, Richard, Hans, May, Maud and Wilhelmina Kelson. James and Bessie Carl toured Australia and New Zealand between the 10th of June 1899 and August 1902. In 1899 he trained Wilhelmina, and then she went on to travel with Bessie and James. They were known as the Valdares. On the 23rd of December 1899 in the Launceston Daily Telegraph. On Tuesday night, the Valdare troupe commenced a season under canvas at Market Green. The troupe is full of talent and is well spoken of where appearances have been made. On the 18th of August 1900, they're up at Gympie, Queensland. Something quite unique is promised by the Valdares in their pavilion of varieties. The three Valdares themselves are aptly described as champion trick cyclists. Then on the 9th of February 1901 in the Camperdown Chronicle of Victoria. On next Wednesday and Thursday we're promised a visit from the world-famed Valdares Vaudeville Company. The company comes with a splendid reputation and should command large houses during their stay in Camperdown. The Geelong Advertiser says, the Valdares Variety and Novelty Company satisfied a highly appreciative audience, and its entertainment has not been overrated in the slightest degree. On the contrary, the performance is one that cannot be too highly praised, for it is wonderfully clever and refined withal. The exhibition of trick cycling by the Valdares is an entertainment in itself, and the amazing feats they achieve eclipse anything in the line of business previously witnessed here. Some of them would be regarded as incredible if described, and must be seen to be appreciated. Every act was executed with a grace that seems to rob it of daring, and the performers were greeted with rounds of applause. On the 26th of March 1901 in the Broken Hill Barrier Miner in New South Wales, Mr. James Valdare and Miss Bessie Valdare are each examples of the perfect type of male and female athlete. They make it manifest that they are acrobats and contortionists of considerable skill. A company of reputedly good artists supports the principles. The company has recently had a successful tour in Victoria. Of the Valdares, only one thing can be said of them, and that is that their performance is a marvellous one. In their hands, the bicycle is taken every conceivable liberty with. The backbone of the performance was the wonderful display of bicycle trick riding by Mr. James and Miss Bessie Valdare, each of whom executed marvellous evolutions on the machine. At one moment they would be standing on the left pedal and the next moment on the right. Then Mr. Valdare would appear in front of the handlebar with his feet still working the pedals at the back. Next he would lie down in the framework and work the pedals with his hands. In fact, there is no conceivable position that he did not assume while the machine was travelling around the stage the whole time. The showiest and most exciting part of the performance undoubtedly consisted of Mr. Valdare riding around the stage with Miss Valdare standing on his shoulders, both having their arms extended. Then on the 5th of April 1901, they're down at Petersburg, South Australia. We have the pleasure in announcing the first appearance of the Valdares Vaudeville and Novelty Company at the Town Hall. The accomplished performers are now concluding a most successful season at Broken Hill. The show is clever, bright, varied and interesting. There are no tiresome waits and only one interval. The main feature of the entertainment is the marvellous exhibition of trick cycling by the Valdares, two graceful and daring wheelers who assuredly deserve all the praise that has been bestowed on them. After riding around the stage with his front wheel in the air, Mr. Valdare dispenses with the useless appendage and grasps the front part of the frame where the handles ought to have been, and he paddles gaily along while the audience nervously holds their breath. Bessie Valdare also performed clever tricks, and in her exhibitions with Mr. Valdare wore a smile of cool indifference even in the most hazardous situations. Then they're in Western Australia. In the Kalgoorlie Miner on the 29th of May 1901, the Valdez American Specialty Company will, on Saturday night, open a season of 4 nights at Her Majesty's Theatre. The company comes with good credentials, and the feats of the Valdez family, who are expert trick cyclists, have received great reviews in the hands of the coastal critics. On the 10th of June 1901, they're in Boulder, Western Australia. The sparkling entertainment given by the Valdez was again the subject of much applause last night. The show is one of the best variety companies that has visited the field, each item being of a high-grade character. The Valdez do apparent impossibilities with a cycle as easily as the ordinary rider can fall off. Then 2 days later, at the Maori Hall at Menzies, Friday evening, the first appearance of Valdez American Specialty Company, a superb aggregation of 16-star artistes, headed by the world's champion trick cyclists, Bessie and James Valdez. Absolutely the greatest artistes in their line that have ever visited Australia. Then they head off to Tasmania on the 29th of October 1901 in the Zeehan and Dundas Herald. They will make their appearance at the Gaiety Theatre this evening, when they should be greeted with a bumper house. The performances of the Valdez are yet fresh in the memories of townsfolk, and no doubt they'll be glad to renew their acquaintance with these clever artistes. The program is a full and varied one, calculated to suit all tastes. After she left the Valdez, she joined a travelling rough riding show cum circus, Martini's. Julia, her sister, was known as Mrs. Martini and was with the company from May 1900. In the Maryborough Chronicle, Wide Bay and Burnett Advertiser in Queensland on the 13th of October 1902, Martini's Australian Rough Riders, 6 champion buck jumpers including Dargan's Grey, and Miss Mena Val is listed in her Invisible Aerial Wire Act. They're in Charters Towers, Queensland on the 26th of February 1903. Where it says that Martini's 5th rough riding exhibition at the Cremorne Gardens last night drew a large audience. Shortly after 8 o'clock, a wire walking exhibition by Miss Mena Val, who promises to be very adept as an equilibrist. A slack wire last night somewhat militated against her performance. She afterwards gave a tricky exhibition on a bicycle and was warmly applauded. Then on the 9th of November 1904, in the Western Star and Roma Advertiser in Queensland, by way of introduction to the principal events of the program, a clever exhibition of tight wire walking was given by Miss Mena Val. They then head down to New South Wales on the 8th of June 1905 in the Macleay Chronicle of Kempsey. Miss Mena Val, a trick wire walker and bicyclist, was much applauded on each occasion. Then 2 weeks later, they head to Taree. Martini's Buck Jumpers was well patronised, the audience being highly delighted with the performance. Miss Mena Val in her slack wire walking and trick bicycle acts won enthusiastic applause. On the 5th of September, they're at Newcastle. The 3rd exhibition of Martini's Buck Jumpers attracted a large crowd of people to the ring. The clever work of Miss Mena Val on a bicycle and on the tightrope, and Martini's fine performance on the triple horizontal bars were fully appreciated. They then are in Sydney for a 6-week season in January 1906, where it's mentioned that Miss Mena Val performs interesting wire walking and bicycle feats. On the 10th of March 1906 in Sydney, a big program will be presented at Martini's buck jumping show tonight. Miss Mena Val will make her reappearance. In 1907, Wilhelmina Kelson married John A. Dempsey, known as Jack, in Narrandera, New South Wales. Jack was born near Jingellic, New South Wales, and was 5 years older than Wilhelmina. In May 1906, the Dempsey brothers were each given a silver-mounted riding whip for their spectacular exhibitions of riding. On the 19th of December 1908, in the Burke Western Herald, it mentions Martini's buck jumping show and says Mrs. Martini's buck jumping show, which was advertised to appear in Burke at the beginning of the week, arrived on Wednesday. The trip from Brewarrina has been arduous owing to the rain, and the loss of horses caused a couple of extra days' delay. To add to the trouble, when they arrived, Mrs. Martini and her sister received a telegram announcing their father's death. The marriage didn't last that long, as on the 3rd of June 1911 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph it announces the divorce of Jack and Wilhelmina. Wilhelmina Dempsey, formerly Kelson, petitioned for divorce from John Elbert Dempsey, horse trainer, on the grounds of desertion. They were married at the Church of England in Narrandera on the 25th of April 1907. Decree nisi was granted, returnable in 6 months. The details of the divorce case were outlined in the Sydney Sun on the 2nd of June 1911.
The checkered career of a circus artist was told in the divorce court this morning. Wilhelmina Dempsey, formerly Kelson, applied for the annulment of her marriage with John Elbert Dempsey on the grounds of desertion. Both parties had to do with the circus profession, and 2 months after their marriage, the respondent left his wife to start showing with one of his brothers. Since that time, he never supported her and never lived with her. She did not know why he went away. For a week or two, the petitioner stayed with Dempsey's parents at Narrandera, but could not get on with them, as they were always singing off at her. So she returned to Sydney and assisted her sister, Mrs. Martini, who was also a circus proprietor. The petitioner took engagements afterwards with several circus and variety shows, going to Queensland and Tasmania, and although she saw the respondent often and twice at the Sydney show, she got no satisfaction out of him. More than once he ran away from her. Jack married Violet Biggs in Hay, New South Wales in 1912. Jack's death was announced in the Murrumbidgee Irrigator in Leek, New South Wales on the 17th of March 1950. Death of an outstanding horseman. One of Australia's greatest horsemen and an outstanding athlete passed away in Sydney last Friday. Mr. John A. Dempsey, known as Jack Dempsey, one of the early pioneers of the district, died suddenly at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital aged 65. He was an outstanding all-round athlete, excelling as one of Australia's champion footrunners. It was, however, as one of Australia's great horsemen that Jack Dempsey was known throughout Australia and overseas. He held the Australian buckjumping championship title for a year, losing the title the following year to his brother, Arthur Dempsey. The Dempsey brothers, together with Billy Waite, from episode 277, were the three ace horsemen of Australia in their heyday, and it was in these days that there were many thousands of contenders for such a title. These three were the greatest horsemen Australia has produced. Mr. Dempsey was the second youngest son of Mr. and Mrs. Harry Dempsey of Narrandera. He was born at a place known in those days as No Place, situated in the Upper Murray. He came to Narrandera with his parents over 50 years ago, where he lived for the greatest part of his youth. In his youth, Mr. Dempsey was associated with the famous Scunthorpe buck-jumping show and also with that prince of showmen, the late Mr. Martini, who conducted a famous buck-jump show. He's survived by his widow and two sons, Henry living in England and George in Leeton, and a daughter Phyllis. So getting back to Mena, on the 27th of September 1907 in the Newcastle Morning Herald, says Martini's buckjumpers are announced to give another performance. Several new features will be introduced, including a trick bicycle act by Miss Mena Val, who will give a performance on the aerial wire. On the 8th of August 1908, they're in Brisbane. It says Miss Mena Val will appear in aerial wire and trick cycling acts, and an exhibition will be given with stock and bullock whips. On the 28th of September 1908, they're in the Darling Downs in Queensland. There was a large attendance at the concluding night of Martini's buck-jumping show. In the regular program was the trick bicycle riding by Miss Mena Val. They're then down in New South Wales on the 6th of February 1909, and in the Molong Express and Western District Advertiser, it says the well-known and popular show will, after an absence of 2 years, visit Molong on Monday night. Miss Mena Val will appear in her clever trick bicycle act and the wonderful exhibition with stock and bullock whips, introducing the two largest whips in the world. They then did a short season in Newtown in the August of 1909, where it said that Miss Mena Val disclosed an artiste of the wheel perhaps not to be surpassed. She also exhibited as a wire walker. It also said Bill Jonas and Miss Mena Val gave exhibitions of stock whip cracking, the former cracking with one hand a whip of 60 foot long. Some clever trick cycle riding was done by Miss Mena Val. And I did a shorts episode on Billy Jonas, episode number 32. I then headed off to Bowral in New South Wales on the 27th of August 1909. On being interviewed, Mr. Barry Sullivan, the advanced manager, informed us the horses had recently had a 6-month spell and are now in the pink of condition. Billy Jonas, assisted by Miss Mena Val, introduces a very neat and clever exhibition of stock and bullock whip cracking, including a number of whips varying in size and weight, from the ordinary whips to Henderson's monster stock whip measuring 60 feet and weighing 15 pounds. Some very clever trick cycling and wire walking is introduced by Miss Mena Val. They headed over to Goulburn and then returned to Sydney by the 1st of September 1909. Mr. J. M. Ryan from Martini's buck-jumping show writes from Bowral, saying the show opened at Liverpool to a splendid house. Everything else went well, especially Miss Mena Val with the big whips, the Monster Bullock Whip and Henderson's Big Stock Whip, measuring 60 foot and weighing 15 pounds. The audience cannot make out how she lifts them, let alone cracks them. Miss Mena Val had a clever exhibition of wire walking, followed later by trick cycling, for which she earned a hearty applause. Then on the 10th of September 1909, they're in the Adelong, Tumut and Tumbarumba area. On the 3rd of November 1909, they've headed down to Melbourne. Martini's Buck Jumpers, an exciting show. Martini's Buck Jumping Show made their first appearance in Melbourne at the Cyclorama last evening and were accorded a hearty reception by a crowded audience. The program opened with an exhibition of wire walking by Miss Mena Val, who performed some daring feats. An exhibition of stock whip cracking was given by Billy Jonas and Miss Mena Val, the only lady exponent of the art in Australia. Mena Val also gave a clever exhibition of trick cycling. On the 26th of November 1909, they're in Ballarat. Then a few weeks later, they've headed over to Bendigo, and then they're up at Echuca on the 23rd of December. By the 7th of January 1910, they've gone over to Shepparton, where it says amongst the star vaudeville turns is Mena Val, trick cyclist, wire walker, and the only lady whip cracker in the world. Miss Mena Val was really wonderful, and she is without doubt a thorough artiste in the particular departments of vaudeville turn, such as wire walking, trick bicycle riding and whip cracking. The stock whip cracking exhibitions by Billy Jonas and Miss Mena Val was one of the best items of the show. On the 4th of April 1910, they're in Launceston, Tasmania. The Woods Winson Company, now occupying the Empire Theatre, presented a number of new items on Saturday night, principal among which was a clever performance on the wire by Miss Mena Val, showing singular proficiency in this particular branch of her profession. It now seems that Wilhelmina has left her sister's company and is going off with another company in Tasmania. On the 11th of April 1910, the popularity of the Woods Winson Company of vaudeville entertainers and animated pictures is now firmly established at the Empire Theatre. The wire act by Miss Mena Val is a very clever performance. Her balancing and waltzing on the tight wire is daring and neat. They closed at the Empire Theatre on the 13th of April 1910, and at this stage, Mena was listed as part of the act called the Two Speeds. It says the Speeds, Val and Will, are a clever duo of trick cyclists, and notwithstanding the limited stage room, they did a series of tricks which were heartily applauded and earned an enthusiastic recall. On the 20th of April 1910 at Formby, in the police court, a sitting of this court was held yesterday afternoon, where William Johnston Douglas and Mena Val, known in theatrical circles as the Two Speeds, proceeded against Charles Woods of Woods Winson Company for the recovery of £8, 8 salary alleged to be due at the rate of £7 per week. Mr. D. Urquhart appeared for the defendant and raised an objection that the court had no jurisdiction on the grounds that there was nothing to show whether the debt was contracted in Tasmania and whether the money had been owing for over 6 months. The bench adjourned the case until this morning. No costs were allowed. Subsequently, the parties affected had an amicable settlement, and the artists appeared as usual in last night's entertainment. Then by the 5th of August 1910, Wilhelmina is up in Brisbane with the Barton Brothers Circus. Barton Brothers Combined Circus and Buck Jumping Show is opening for a season of 7 nights only. Since the last visit to Brisbane, the company's been reorganised and strengthened with the introduction of 20 new artists. Miss Mena Val, trick cyclist, late of Martini's Buck Jumping Show, was one of those listed as fresh new talent. On the 22nd of August 1910, in Ipswich, there was a crowded house at the third performance of Barton Brothers' popular circus, and Miss Mena Val is listed as one of the artists. Then they're in Maitland, New South Wales on the 26th of November 1910. By the 22nd of August 1911, she's moved on and she's in Beechworth. Grand appearance of Jones's King's Moving Theatre. 2 nights only in Beechworth, greatest vaudeville company on earth, headed by Mena Val, the wire walker. So she's getting top of the bill as part of this company. The next day they're in Rutherglen. She's back with Barton's Circus on the 13th of January 1911, and they are in New Zealand. They are still touring New Zealand in November 1912 when the Haiwa and Normandy Star put an article in on Barton's Circus, saying on the occasion of its last visit to Haiwera, this circus was thoroughly enjoyed by all who witnessed it. Since then, Mr. Barton has returned to New Zealand from a tour in search of fresh attractions, and so successful was his quest that a great improvement has been effected even upon its former excellent showing. A novel and clear term was the stock whip cracking exhibition by Miss Mena Val, who wielded her chosen instruments impartially with either hand or both at once, extinguished candles and flicked a cigarette from the mouth of an attendant. A trick cycling turn was also completed by Miss Mena Val. In January 1913, in Nelson, Barton Brothers and Circus Travelling Zoo. This time it says Mena and Mona Val, lady stock whip manipulators and the greatest trick cyclists in this hemisphere. The last mention of her in that New Zealand tour is on the 29th of March 1913 in the Southland Times. She's back in New Zealand on the 28th of September 1917 and in the Huntly Press and District Advocate with Barton Circus, Miss Mena Val, the stockwhip cracker. In the Taihape Daily Times on the 27th of October 1917, with Barton Circus, it says, mention must be made of Miss Mena Val, whose wire walking, trick cycling and whip cracking were the most entertaining items. And in the Patea Mail, Barton's Colossal Circus, Miss Mena Val proved herself a very capable artist, and her wire walking and trick cycling would have done credit to any vaudeville stage. Another feature of this little lady's work was her stock whip cracking. The last mention of her with Barton's Circus in New Zealand is in the Greymouth Evening Star on the 26th of September 1918. It seems after their extended tour through New Zealand and the Pacific Islands that Mena Val did not reappear with Barton's Circus, and at this point she disappears from the records. Now a little on Wilhelmina's siblings. Julia Charlotte Kelson, known as Jules, was born in 1877 in Sydney. She used the stage name Miss Jessie Devine, and she was a serio-comic artist and danseuse. On the 16th of October 1896 in the Bendigo Advertiser, Bell's Juveniles at the A&A Hall. Mr. Bell's now little popular company last night had another success, and it says in the second part of the act that Jessie Devine, Testro and Percy Howard all vied in their efforts to please the audience. Miss Jessie Devine danced gracefully and met with loud applause. On the 24th of March 1899, she's in the West Australian in Perth at the Bijou Theatre in Fremantle. Mr. Frank M. Clark's All-Star Company will appear at the Bijou Theatre in Fremantle. 3 new artists, and Miss Jessie Devine is included, and in brackets saying a song and dance and serio comic. On the 26th of May 1900, she's in Mount Gambier. In the greatest event of the year, the first appearance of Martini and Shaw's Circus Varieties. A world of novelties, absolutely the most talented company now on tour. Miss Jessie Devine, the talented American soubrette. Miss Jessie Devine showed no little ability in her dancing, and some serio-comic songs she sang were very popular. In Millicent in South Australia on the 16th of June 1900, Miss Jessie Devine, who in short skirts and rather economical clothing generally sang When London Sleeps. The front seat sat up and breathed heavily but stayed around, while the back part of the hall showed unmistakable signs of approval. Her love songs in character pleased the ears of the attendants, while their eyes were feasted by her skillful exhibition of step dancing, in which she conclusively proved by the occasional elevation of her pedal extremities that she was perfectly free from sciatica. So a little on Martini. Who was he? Well, Martini's father, it seems, was William Breheny, who arrived in Australia in 1854 on the Columbia. He was from Ireland and had a younger brother, Patrick, that was already in Australia. William was 20 and single when he came to Australia and became a gold miner in Victoria and New South Wales. He married Julia Feehan from Ireland in Victoria. Martini was with Soquet Brothers Circus at the end of 1898 in Tasmania, and then in February 1898 was in Newcastle with Harmston Circus. It says the horizontal bar work was equally good, the splendid acts performed by seniors Martini, Bisac and Waldine. In the third week of February 1899, Martini went out on his own with the Martini Company of Acrobats, and they appeared at Scottsdale, northeast of Launceston. Martini's in Albury with the Montgomery Circus in September 1899, and it says the wonderful triple horizontal bar act of the Martinis was roundly applauded. Later in that month, Martini performed as an individual artist in Her Majesty's Theatre in Wangaratta, and 6 weeks later was performing at Geelong with Professor Hyland of Hyland Circus. In the third week of December 1899, Martini and Trevo were now with the Empire Variety and Specialty Company, entertaining at the Royal Theatre in Brisbane. And then in May 1900, at Mount Gambier, it mentions Martini and Shaw's Circus and Variety Show, saying he's the world's greatest gymnast, and Miss Jessie Devine was recalled for all of her dances and songs. On the 6th of July 1900, in the Horsham Times, the greatest event of the year, Martini and Shaw's Circus Varieties in a World of Novelties. Headed by Martini, the world's greatest gymnast, who has appeared 3 times before their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales, twice at Marlborough House and once at Sandringham before 400 guests. And Miss Jessie Devine, the clever American song and dance artiste. They arrived in Charlton on the 10th of August and then went to Kerrang and Echuca in the first days of September. On the 11th of September 1900, in the Kerrang Times, it says Mr. Martini is a gymnast in the front rank, and his clever little wife, Miss Jessie Devine, has a gift for captivating the audience. So it seems by that article that they have married. They moved on to Mildura and Wentworth and then back to Echuca for 2 performances in the October. Then Martini and Miss Devine were with Professor Screwthorpe, the hero of the Gordon's Famous Leap, and his band of Australian Rough Riders, doing a season in Melbourne in October 1901. He's then out on his own on the 19th of October 1900 in Kyabram, and then they're back under the Martini and Shaw's Gaiety Company in Kyabram on the 19th of October 1900. And in the program, Jessie Devine has an act as a serio-comic titled Barney Hooligan. Martini does a funny clown acrobatic feats, and then Miss Jessie Devine does another 2 songs on the night, one is serio-comic and another character song. In Yamurka, he's then referred to as Senior Martini. In January 1901 in Wangaratta, Martini and Devine contributed their performances at a benefit for James Clark, who'd lost all his barber tools. Now Martini was termed as Professor Martini and Jessie Devine as Mrs. Martini. Says that Professor Martini performed the triple horizontal bar and Mrs. Martini, Miss Jessie Devine, serio-comic artist and danseuse. There was a mention that gave a reason as to why he didn't last long with Lance Screwthorpe, and it says that Lance was not very happy as Martini, Mena Val, Jessie Hunt, a lady named Jewel, who's Jessie Devine, and a young bloke by the name of Callahan left his buck jumping show and began their own competitive travelling show. They started their new enterprise in December 1901, starting out from Bankstown with a small performing tent and a small wagonette. Nothing is really heard of him until a year later, when Martini is mentioned in a letter to the editor of the Sydney-based Referee. It says the famous horseman Jack Pendergast offered a challenge to another horseman. Pendergast stated that he was the principal rough rider for Martini's hippodrome and that they were travelling the south coast of New South Wales for a few weeks. The letter had been sent from Bulli. In the Bulletin in January 1906, in the start of his new show. When I left Sydney 3 years ago with a small sideshow, we struggled along. At Parramatta, the van man thought I was going to balance him and swindle him out of his money, and when I paid up, he said, "Look here, I didn't expect this. I'll tell you where there's a horse you ought to get, up at Lithgow. That's Dargan's Grey." Well, we went up to Lithgow and I arranged to get the horse for one night for £5. He was so pleased with Dargan's performance in the little show that the owner said you can have the horse on Monday night for nothing. A few days after that, I bought the horse for £8. Since then, I've walked him overland right up to Port Douglas, across to Normanton, by sea to Thursday Island and down again to Sydney, picking up buckers all the way. On the 1st of April 1902 in the Lithgow Mercury, it announced that Martini's band of Rough Riders had performed to good houses. The newspaper told its readers that several hundred men attended the exhibitions, the main attraction being Dargan's Grey. The buckjumper had become a household name by this time and still remains in the annals of Australian buckjumpers. The paper also stated that then came Martini and his remarkably clever treble act on the horizontal bar. We venture to say that no circus in the state has a more able performer than Mr. Martini in this particular class, and the spectators showed their appreciation by unstinted applause. On the 22nd of July 1902 in Queensland, a combination-styled Martini's Rough Riders gave an exhibition of scientific ball punching, horizontal bar exercises, boxing and rough riding in a canvas enclosure. The chief attraction of the evening was the buck jumping. Mr. Martini performed several clever feats on the horizontal bars and also took part of a clown alongside Combo Jack's brother, who impersonated a Chinaman. During the evening, Mrs. Martini, besides rendering a song, showed that she was no mean exponent of the noble art of self-defence by boxing 3 rounds with Jay Costa, the lightweight connected with the show. A little over 3 months after their Lithgow performance, Queensland newspapers reported that Martini brothers and their buck jumpers were performing at the National Association show in Brisbane in August. In October 1902, they performed at Maryborough and then commenced a 2.5-year tour of Queensland and Thursday Island, and in March 1905 toured New South Wales. Following Martini's death, Julia took over the show. On the 3rd of July 1907, the Sydney Sportsman outlined his death. Admirers of an enterprising and pushful showman will learn with regret of the death of Martin Breheny, known throughout New South Wales and Queensland as Martini. At Armidale on Sunday afternoon, he happened to be driving a pair of horses harnessed to a wagon when the horses took fright and bolted. Martini's legs became entangled in the reins and he was thrown out and dragged some distance and received such injuries as ultimately caused his death. Martini commenced his professional career as an acrobat and made something of a name for himself by appearing at Frank Smith's Haymarket Alhambra years ago and later at the Tivoli Theatre. Martini, however, made his hit when, after a lengthy tour of Queensland, he once more struck Sydney with a company of buck riders and bucking outlaw horses. The star performer was the famous Dark Bay gelding Bobs. Martini used to sit on his haunches nightly at the ringside and hold up a wad of quids for the individual who could ride Bobs in a saddle provided by the show. Martini himself was no horseman at all. He used to impress the fact on the public nightly, and it seems a peculiar coincidence that, after all, he met his death while engaged about horses in the most everyday way. At times he was irritable under the crowd's running fire of jocular criticism, but he was a good showman who, in a brief space of time, accomplished much from nothing. May the clay rest lightly on Martini. And a memoriam was placed by Julia. J. Martini, Martin Breheny. In sad and loving memory of my dear husband and our dear employer who was accidentally killed at Armidale. 'Tis just 12 months ago today since my dear Martin and our employer passed away. The blow is hard, the trial severe, to part with one we love so dear. We cannot clasp his loving hand, thy face we cannot see, yet this little token tell we still remember thee, inserted by his loving wife and employers. Julia was known for her sharp wit in managing the crowd. She once famously invited a heckler to join the mules in the ring. She sold the show and then married James Ryan, known as Mick, in 1909 in Dubbo, and they had a daughter, Gwendolyn Mary Merle Ryan, in Sydney in 1915. And Julia died on the 30th of August 1937 in Burwood, New South Wales, at the age of 60. On the 31st of August 1937, in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, once ran show of buck jumpers. Proprietress of the Martini buck jumping show more than 30 years ago, Mrs. Julia Charlotte Ryan died at her home in Paisley Road, Burwood, yesterday. She was 60 and had been in ill health for the past 5 years. She was the wife of Mr. J.M. Ryan, a well-known Sydney bookmaker. As proprietress of the Martini show, Mrs. Ryan travelled throughout Australia, and the show was renowned for its leading buck jumper Bobs. In 1908, Mrs. Ryan, who was born in New Zealand, was married. She and her husband managed the show for a time before it was sold to a company that took it to England. She was an intrepid rider. Wilhelmina's brother, John Frederick Kelson, was born in 1874 in New Zealand. On the 23rd of August 1895, he was charged with negligent driving and received 7 days' imprisonment. On the 30th of August 1895 in the Melbourne Herald, John Kelson, a youth of 19, was charged at the Collingwood Court today with having criminally assaulted Elizabeth Pistoles, a girl of 14 years of age, and he was jailed for 3 months with hard labour for that offence. On the 11th of February 1896, he was fined for obstructing a carriage on the road, and then on the 5th of May 1896 for insulting behaviour, which he was also fined for. On the 8th of July 1897 in the Melbourne Argus, John Kelson, 33, who has a record of 6 previous convictions, was charged at the Collingwood Court yesterday with unlawfully assaulting 2 boys under the age of 10. The accused, without the slightest provocation, seized a boy named Lacey by the throat and, after striking him a number of blows on the face, kicked him several times and ran away. On the following evening, the prisoner was observed to throw a bag filled with sand at Lacey, which struck him on the head and knocked him down and rendered the boy unconscious for half an hour. On the evening of the 1st, the prisoner met the boy Humphreys in Cambridge Street and brutally assaulted him in a similar manner. The bench characterised the prisoner's conduct as being brutal and cowardly and sentenced him to 6 months imprisonment for the assault on Lacey and 3 months imprisonment for the assault on Humphreys. He was placed in Geelong Jail and was released on remission on the 3rd of March 1898. He married Ethel May Hornblower in 1899 when he was 22 and Ethel 30. They lived in Fitzroy, and Ethel's sister Minnie was the basis of episode 106. On the 12th of December 1901 in the Melbourne Herald, a dealer, 26 years of age, named John Kelson was charged in the criminal court with assault and robbery. The Crown alleged that the accused on the night of November the 30th armed himself with 2 bricks and kicked and battered in the door of a house occupied by an Indian named Nubo. When inside, he knocked Nubo down, caught him by the throat and took 10 shillings from his pocket. The accused said that the Indian and another countryman threatened to knock his head off, and to frighten them he picked up the bricks. He denied the charge. He was found guilty. There were 5 previous convictions against him, and the sentences showed that he had been treated with leniency. In 1895, he was charged with carnally knowing a girl under the age of 16 and got 3 months. In July 1897, 2 charges of assault, and the Collingwood justices imposed sentences of 6 months and 3 months cumulative. In June 1898, he was ordered by the Fitzroy justices to pay a fine of 40 shillings or go to jail for 14 days for resisting police, and he also served 1 month for stealing a bag of oatmeal. In passing sentence, Justice Williams agreed with the jury's verdict. The present charge did not relate to an aggravated assault, but on account of the accused's record, he could not be let off lightly, and he'd be sentenced to 18 months' prison with hard labour. John died on the 25th of August 1910 in Collingwood, aged only 33. Another brother, Richard Kelson, was born in 1890. He was also jailed, and he stated that he was born in 1882. It said New South Wales originally, but then it also says New Zealand. On the 28th of August 1899, he was endeavouring to impose, and he received 7 days' jail. On the 13th of December 1899 in the Melbourne Herald, at the Fitzroy Court today, Richard and John Kelson, brothers, were charged with assaulting William Molan, an elderly man engaged in farming in the Dandenong State Forest. The 2 accused men met Molan, a Swede, near Mount Gambier Hotel. They spoke of introducing them to their mother, who was of the same nationality as himself. After drinking some lemonade and beer, Richard Kelson dragged him into a house, and he, suspecting that they might rob him, burst the door open and got out. He was followed and received a blow that knocked him down, causing a wound to his head. Constable McCubbin took Molan to the hospital, where the wound was dressed, and arrested the prisoner shortly after. Richard Kelson pled guilty. He was 16 and couldn't read and write. His mother stated that when he got under the influence of drink, he didn't know what he was doing. She intended to take the family to Western Australia. He was fined £10 in default of 3 months' imprisonment, and his brother was discharged. On the 1st of November 1890, he was given 3 months for obscene language. On the 13th of December 1899, he got 3 months for assault. On the 26th of February 1901, obstructing the road, 14 days imprisonment. And the 9th of May 1901 for gaming, he received a fine or 1 month's imprisonment. On the 15th of October 1901, he received 12 months hard labour for larceny from a person, and he was in Beechworth Jail on the 12th of November 1901 and was released on the 30th of August 1902, freedom by remission. On the 7th of April 1904 in the Melbourne Herald, today in the Collingwood Court, Richard Kelson, a hawker, was prosecuted for assaulting Lizzie Thomas. The accused was arrested over a week ago, but the prosecutrix could not be induced to attend the court. She was brought up on warrant as an unwilling witness. She stated she had a very bad temper, she was to blame and didn't want to press the charge. She stated she'd been living with the accused for 4 years, and on the 20th she asked him for a sprat. They had a few words and a struggle, and in the course of which he received a slight scratch on the arm from a table knife that he had in his hand. She went into the street and told Constable McCulloch. The accused, when arrested, said that she caused the wound herself. A fine of 20 shillings was imposed, in default 7 days imprisonment. And in his jail record it stated that he was single and his mother was Mrs. Kelson of North Fitzroy. And Richard died in 1953 in Sydney. And another sibling, Hans Louis Kelson, was born on the 2nd of July 1881 in Dunedin, New Zealand. He married Mary Ellen Jones on the 1st of April 1911 in Victoria. They had 5 children and he was a dealer, and they lived in Fitzroy. On the 25th of December 1921 in Melbourne, it says a shooting affray in Napier Street, Fitzroy, was reported to local police this evening. A number of police went to the scene and found Hans Louis Kelson, a married man living in Fitzroy, who was supposed to have been shot at. He denied there'd been any shooting, but stated he had been hit over the head with a bottle and kicked. The police arrested Frank Mall, 27, a stevedore, and David Smith, 29, a labourer, both charged with assaulting Kelson. Smith was also charged with assaulting William Gonanon, a youth of 16 who was the stepson of Kelson's. Smith, when charged, complained that he'd been shot. He showed a bullet mark on his hip and was taken to Melbourne Hospital. Francis Gonanon, another stepson of Kelson's, was arrested and charged with attempting to murder Smith. The story was related by the Crown witness that Kelson, who was the stepfather of Francis and William Gonanon, was selling fruit off a barrow in Napier Street, and a man named Henry Kinman, known as Apple Harry, drove up in a lorry and entered the Council Club Hotel. Frank Mole came up, jumped on the lorry and expressed an intention of having a joyride. Kelson, who knew Kinman, remonstrated him. Mole went over to him and demanded to know why he was interested. After some words, Kelson picked up an iron bar to defend himself. Kelson was thrown to the ground and struck. Meanwhile, David Mall appeared at the scene, and after an argument, Kelson was hit on the head that knocked him out. William Gonanon went to the assistance of his stepfather, and he was also struck with a bottle. Kelson had to be treated at the Melbourne Hospital for wounds to the head. Francis Gonanon, having heard of the disturbance, came to the scene in time to see stepfather and his brother struck with bottles. It was alleged he then drew a revolver and shot David Mall in the hip. Mall was taken to the Melbourne Hospital. David and Frank Mall said that Kelson was the aggressor and had thrown iron weights at Frank Mall. David Mall had attempted to go to the rescue when the revolver was produced. He struck at the revolver with the beer bottle and did not, as alleged, hit Kelson on the head with it. And Hans died in August 1948 in Fitzroy at the age of 67. So the family of Wilhelmina Sophia Kelson, Mena Val, was a very interesting family, but she also had a very interesting life, a life of the circus.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.